Hello, and welcome to the Complete Podcast Network. I'm Anthony Wilson, recording from Los Angeles, California. Let me dive right into the biggest news story of the day. On August 27, 2025, a mass shooting occurred at the Annunciation Catholic Church and School in South Minneapolis, Minnesota, during an all-school mass marking the first week of classes. The attack targeted children and worshipers gathered inside the church, resulting in 2 children killed and 17 others injured, including 14 children. 2 children, aged 8 and 10, were fatally shot while seated in church pews. Of the 17 injured, 14 were children, ages ranging from 6 to 14, with at least 7 in critical condition initially. 2 children remained in critical condition as of updates. Hospitals treated patients, including 7 children at Children's Minnesota, undischarged, and 11 at Hennepin Healthcare, 9 children and 2 adults, with 6 children and 1 adult in critical condition, 4 requiring surgery. The gunman, identified as 23-year-old Robin Westman from suburban Minneapolis, approached the church from outside around 8:30 a.m., dressed in black and armed with a rifle, shotgun, and pistol. Westman fired dozens of rounds, up to 50 reported by witnesses, through the windows toward the pews. He had no extensive criminal history, and his mother previously worked at the school. Westman died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at the back of the church. The shooting lasted about 2 minutes, with gunfire initially mistaken by some as fireworks or explosions. Students and staff hid under pews or evacuated to safety, such as preschool classrooms. Police responded immediately, providing first aid and rescuing children. The incident was described as a deliberate act of violence against innocent children and worshipers by Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey expressed profound grief, stating, "Children are dead. These kids were literally praying," and criticized empty thoughts and prayers rhetoric. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz called it a horrific act of violence and spoke with President Donald Trump. Trump was briefed, ordered U.S. flags flown to half-staff until August 31st, 2025, in honor of the victims, and noted FBI involvement. Local sports teams like the Minnesota Vikings and Twins issued statements of support and issued statements of heartbreak and support. This was the 5th school shooting in the U.S. in 2025 and the 4th shooting in Minneapolis within 24 hours, following 3 incidents on August 26th that killed 3 people and injured 8 others, including 1 fatal and 6 injured near Cristo Rey Jesuit High School. No connections between the shootings have been confirmed, but authorities are investigating amid rising gun violence concerns in the city. The ATF is tracing the firearms used. Thank you once again to Grok AI for that summary. And I'll also add so the shooter was reportedly transgender, and he released a YouTube video shortly before the shootings. The video featured his manifesto and the weapons presumably used in the shooting. And one of the magazines shown in the video said, "Kill Trump." You know, in my opinion, the mass shooting problem in this country that goes back to Columbine, so it's been over 25 years now. Columbine was, it was 97, 98, 99, one of those years, right? But over 25 years now of mass shootings in the U.S. And of course, in situations like this, both sides will look to politicize it. You have people, of course, who are always going to say we have a gun problem in the country, and you have people who are pointing to, mental health and mental illness and how mental health connects to the transgender debate and how many transgender people, especially young people, end up committing acts of violence and how that may tie into mental illness. And me personally, I've always felt like the mass violence thing was it's a mental health problem more than it is about guns, because if the person is suffering enough and if the person's having enough issues to the point where they feel like they're going to commit such terrible acts, you can ban assault rifles and these high-powered weapons as much as you want, and that's not going to stop a deranged person from committing such acts of terror. Um, and I think that it's an issue. It's like I always said, if you take away the guns, I mean, the person will come up with a way to be violent. They'll make a bomb. They'll drive their car into whatever it is. We've seen people do that. So the gun issue is not that's not really the issue. Of course, that would make it slightly more difficult. People would have to become more creative, I guess, to commit these types of acts. But you know, overall, I definitely think that it's an issue where uh, you have people who are suffering mentally, people who feel like they've been marginalized, and I think that's where this problem starts. And I think that until we acknowledge that and try to help people who are suffering and people who exist in the shadows, I think these type of things will continue to happen. And I think that I always think about Roger Ebert when he wrote his review of Taxi Driver in 1976. Of course, Taxi Driver, the classic from directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro, and probably De Niro's most iconic performance. And it's amazing. Roger Ebert, almost 50 years ago, he in his review of the film, when it's 1976, movie comes out, I guess, 75. It's been 50 years. But Ebert's review, per RogerEbert.com, his review was released, published January 1st, 1976. And it's amazing the insight and the foresight he had, but the insight that because back then, they weren't really having these type. I think the first time something like this happened was like the 1980s, I think, like a McDonald's or something like that, right? So in 1976, stuff was not like it is or how like it has been for since Columbine. But Roger Ebert wrote, Travis sees a beautiful blonde working in the storefront office of a presidential candidate. She goes out with him a couple of times, but the second time he takes her to a hardcore film and she walks in disgust and won't have any more to do with him. All the same, he calls her for another date, and it's here that we get close to the heart of the movie. The director, Martin Scorsese, gives us a shot of Travis on a pay telephone. And then, as the girl is turning him down, the camera slowly dives to the right and looks down a long, empty hallway. Pauline Kael's review called this shot, which calls attention to itself, a lapse during which Scorsese was maybe borrowing from Antonioni. Scorsese calls this shot the most important one in the film. Why? Because, he says, it's as if we can't bear to watch Travis feel the pain of being rejected. This is interesting because later, when Travis goes on a killing rampage, the camera goes so far as to adopt slow motion so we can see the horror in greater detail. That Scorsese finds the rejection more painful than the murders is fascinating because it helps to explain Travis Bickle, and perhaps it goes some way toward explaining one kind of urban violence. Travis has been shut out so systematically, so often, from a piece of the action that eventually he has to hit back somehow. And in 2004, when he was making his greatest movies list, he wrote, Travis Bickle exists in Taxi Driver as a character with a desperate need to make some kind of contact somehow, to share or mimic the effortless social interaction he sees all around him, but does not participate in. And I just think that most of these shootings that happen, it's the same type of individual that commits these acts as an individual who's isolated. And you have to understand, the more isolated you are, the worse your mental health becomes. And so and I don't want to sound like a sympathizer for basically domestic terrorists because I'm not. What happens is that your genes, though, they interact with your environment, right? So, I mean, there are all types of people who have the same problems as an Elliot Rodger or this fella who did this today or whoever it is, the Columbine kids, and they would never go so far as to be so cowardly as to do what those people did. Um, so basically, it's a genetic thing. It's somebody who already is they're predisposed towards to violence, and then if their environment, meaning how they grew up, their relationship with their parents, what their situation is like at school, that's really my environment in the biological sense. When that happens, uh, when those two things mix, violent predisposition towards violence mixed with an upbringing that leaves something to be desired, in whatever way that manifested, this is what happens. And so I just think it's unfortunate, but we're failing to address the real problem. And I think that uh, if you when the movie Joker came out, and you look at the response that movie got from people who people would call them incels or whatever it is, but these are people who if you look at that character, and then of course that movie Joker was based on Taxi Driver and also the King of Comedy, another Scorsese movie that's more like a Scorsese deep cut, but that's a film where the violence is basically it never comes, and in a lot of ways it's more um, it's more unnerving than Taxi Driver because of that. And I remember reading that Robert De Niro asked him, why did he think that this movie never really caught on in the way as some of the other big movies that some of the big movies that Scorsese did. He did so many of them, and many of them starring De Niro. And De Niro said that he thought that it was the subject matter was the type of stuff that people just kind of they don't even like to think about. Like pretend like it doesn't exist because it makes them so uncomfortable. And I think that there are just so many young men out there who are suffering. And I think when the Joker movie came out and it did so well, and you saw the response from the incel community, if you want to call it that, and I hate to use it. Actually, I wouldn't know it. Look, I don't want to use. I'm using incel the way that liberals use it now. It's like this broad term, right? But really, I shouldn't do that. I hate when people do that, so I shouldn't do it. But I just mean that community. What I mean when I say that, right? These are guys who, socially, um, they've had their struggles. These are not normies, as they say on Reddit, right? These are these are guys who are kind of had problems. I'm talking socially, in school, not the best relationship with their parents and stuff like this. Like these are more men who feel like they've been marginalized, right? And when that movie came out, guys, a lot of guys who they saw themselves in that in Arthur Fleck, as played by Joaquin Phoenix, and so then the movie does so well. I think it got to $1 billion, right? Joaquin wins the Oscar for Best Actor, and then when they do the sequel, the consensus seemed to be that Todd Phillips was basically trying to punish the people who liked the first movie by making it a musical and making it to where Arthur really wasn't the Joker and all those different things, right? And I just think that to take I mean that community of men is the only community of people that is white men in this country who are, if you want to call it white wing or whatever you call it, people who feel like, once again, that they've been pushed to the boundaries in this country. They are um, those men are uh, they're angry, but they have been pushed to to the bottom. They feel like they haven't been heard. That was the appeal of Donald Trump. Is they feel like there was finally somebody who was speaking to them and for them. And but it just seems like and the further you go, towards, like I said, the people who saw themselves in Arthur Fleck, it's like society just really doesn't. It's like it's not a coincidence. They view those guys as the scum of the earth or the lowest of the low, and it's just like, well, the hell with those guys, right? Like they're not people. But they're people, and they have issues, and those issues, the problems that they have, those issues they should be addressed. And I think until we do that, like I said, Todd Phillips, when he did the sequel to Joker, like the consensus was that he was trying to punch the people who liked the first movie. And it's okay to show compassion to the fringe members of society. It's like people people act like, well, this is where you guys are supposed to be, is down here at the bottom, and uh, uh, nobody cares about you. But I think that it's like it's a discussion that nobody wants to have. And again, I'm not trying to sound like a sympathizer for people who, most guys, like I said, who have these sort of issues. And this guy being trans, uh, I don't know how much that contributed to this, but obviously you could tell that this was someone who was lonely socially, someone who was isolated. It's always the case. Never somebody who has a healthy social life who commits such acts of violence. So, I just think it sucks, and again, in no way am I sympathizing. The victims here, the real victims here, are the kids, the innocent kids who lost their lives and who were injured. What I'm saying is at one point, is there a solution to the problem? Because I think it is possible to find a solution. It would take some work, but the first thing that has to happen is you have to acknowledge what the problem actually is, you know. And but of course, rest in peace to the lives lost and the lives affected, the lives changed forever by this senseless and cowardly act. Uh, it's no excuse to. it's no excuse to take whatever frustrations you have out on innocent people. Doesn't matter if it's man, woman, or child. You there's just no excuse for that. And really, I should have led with that, but I wanted to get into the how we can stop this from happening in the future. You And now I switch gears to a much more lighthearted uh, topic, which is so the college football week one. It actually starts Thursday, but the first full slate of games will be on Saturday. And the big one is you got number one Texas opening things up on the road against number three Ohio State. And a strange twist, Texas is actually a 1.5 point underdog in that game. Obviously, Ohio State is the defending national champion, but they lost some guys to the NFL, obviously. And now Texas with Arch Manning, who's coming in with you know, extreme amount of hype coming into the season. Uh, they're the number one team in the country, but again, they'll be the underdog at 9 a.m. our time, so West Coast time, I should say, against Ohio State. I was listening to Bomani Jones uh, when he was talking about uh, Arch Manning and all the hype and everything like that. And basically, Arch Manning is getting Andrew Luck hype. He's getting John Elway hype, and as Bomani was saying, like, what has he really done for people to be talking to him about him like this, right? Now he has the Manning last name. Of course, that's really the reason, right? He's a Manning and he plays quarterback, right? But as Bomani was saying, he's not even. I mean, he's there. He's Peyton Eli's nephew and Archie's grandson. Cooper was the wide receiver. He's Cooper's son, right? So it's interesting because those other guys, I don't think that there's nobody who's he's never even been a starting quarterback in college, before. I think he had a few starts last year when Clint Edwards was out, but you know, uh, I don't know. It's weird. If his name was Arch, I'm trying to think of just like a random last name. If he had a last name that was anything other than Manning, if his name was Arch Myers, you know, what? There's no way that he'd be getting the same amount of hype, you know. So I just think he's being set up to fail, and it's like put all this pressure on a young guy who hasn't really proven anything, and then he has to come out here on the road at Ohio State with all this pressure, and how does he perform? And if he doesn't perform well, then what happens? And is he strong enough mentally, like Omani said, Eli was the guy who the pressure everything just rolled off of him, right? Rolled off his back. Whereas Peyton, stuff would get to him. And so we'll have to see, man. If he comes out and he plays well, then the hype train just keeps rolling. Let's say he comes out and he just absolutely shreds Ohio State or something like that. Let's say he comes out, he throws for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns, right? I mean, the hype is going to be more than Andrew Luck hype. It'll be more than Trevor Lawrence hype. It'll be more. You have to go back to. It'll be different. I mean, John Elway is the all-time quarterback phenom, but yeah, if he comes out and he balls out, it's going to be something to behold, with the level that the hype gets to. But if he doesn't, right? If he doesn't play well, if he struggles, if they get blown out, and let's say he throws a couple of interceptions, and they don't play well, they get blown out, he fumbles, he just looks bad, right? Against a great Ohio State team on the road. Well, then what happens? I think he'll be lucky. He'll be lucky that people don't like. One thing about people is that when they start building you up, right? They will build you up to tear you down, but it's like a lot of times it takes a while for people to admit that they were wrong about somebody, right? When it's somebody who's adamant that, oh, this guy is the one, right? As long as you would have to be, you'd have to flop so hard that they can't possibly keep up with, they can't save face anymore, and they just have to let it go. But when they start building you up like they're building up Arch Manning, the people will do a lot to keep them admitting that they were wrong, right? So he does have that working for him. People who build him up are going to give him every opportunity to prove that he was worthy of their praise. But I mean, obviously, came into college with a lot of hype, but the fact remains that he hasn't really done anything yet in college. So we'll see how he does. Another top 10 matchup is there's a couple more this weekend. LSU at Clemson. Um, Clemson once again. I mean, LSU once again. Last year they started with. Last year they started against USC and lost that one in a pretty, big prime time matchup for a week one game, and we'll see how they do this week if they can do any better. You know, Cade Klubnik coming into his senior year, man. I mean, he's as much of a Heisman candidate as anybody. And then Clemson ranked number 4. That must be the highest they've been ranked in some time since, probably since the days of Trevor Lawrence, or at least, since, it gets the Clemson thing. It's been dead now, kind of, since Trevor Lawrence left, kind of. It might have taken a couple of years for people to realize it, but it hasn't been the same as it was at the peak when they won those 2 national championships. They had Deshaun Watson and Lawrence. So that would actually be kind of cool, though, if Clemson is that good. There's really no reason that they should be. They're playing in the ACC, but I just think you got to have that. Dabo was showing he's got to have that quarterback who's generational. I don't think Cade Klubnik is a Trevor Lawrence or a Deshaun Watson, but he's a darn good quarterback, and he's a senior. And maybe this is the year that Clemson can, get back to that, that Final Four or something like that, or maybe the national championship game. And then also, a top 10 matchup, you got Notre Dame at Miami. Let's see. And Miami they have a new quarterback. Notre Dame is Notre Dame. They're that's gonna be pretty good. Both teams with new quarterbacks, so you never really know how that's gonna go. And I think that could give Texas also an advantage over Ohio State, because Will Howard is he's moved on, But we'll see how it goes, man. It is exciting. I was kind of feeling down about football, but now that it's here, I'm excited. Can Penn State? They finally, this is Joe Klatt had them at number 1 in his top 25 during the summer. Then we'll have to see. But Paul Feinbaum said that James Franklin will find a way to mess up, man. I hope not, man. I'm rooting for. I like James Franklin. I'm rooting for him. He's a hell of a coach. But yeah. So before I get out of here, just a reminder to hit that subscribe button next to the Complete Podcast Network, and to follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at TC Pod Network. You can also send feedback and mailback questions to CompleteLakersPodcast@gmail.com. I am out.